I wonder if you agree with this statement. Hope is the worst of all evils because it prolongs the torments of man. Hope is the worst of all evils because it prolongs the torments of man. That was said by a philosopher called Nietzsche, who thought hope itself was a bad thing precisely because it gets you to start hoping. And you start to think, oh, okay, and you keep going, and then it lets you down. It prolongs the torments of man. What do you think? For example, when a loved one's cancer battle is dragging on, and you never know if the treatment's going to work, or if the cancer will come back, or will they be able to get their checkup, or how long have they got, or how many Christmases, how many more birthdays? Is it cruel to hope? When you can't imagine what the impact of losing them will be on your life, on their family's life, when you can't imagine life without them, and the prognosis is not good, is it cruel to hope? Does it make more sense to just give up and accept the inevitable? All things come to dust, all lives end in one outcome, nothing lasts forever. Is there any point to hope? Is it worth taking someone's hand at their bedside when they're on chemo and saying, don't worry, don't be afraid, everything will be all right, don't give up? Can you actually say that with integrity, or is that an empty hope that simply prolongs the torments and denies reality and makes things worse? Is it cruel to hope? The harsh realities of life mean that sooner or later, all of us will be put in a position where we may have to choose between hope and despair, between going forward and giving up. Some of us may have to make that choice regularly in our lives. And the message tonight is that God has something to say to us about it in the Bible. In this moment, he does not want us to think about this without his input. He has given his word and inspired something for us to hear. Texts like Revelation 21 that speak a message of hope to us is one of the most hopeful passages in the Bible. It's truly a passage for dark times. And for that very reason, it can be perplexing to read it. Because do I believe this? Dare I believe this? Dare I hope? Is it enough for me? Dare I share this with someone in the valley of the shadow of death? Tonight we'll be looking at the hope of Revelation 21. We'll be seeing point 1, that there is a happy ending God promises. But also, point 2, there's a generous invitation on which it is based, verse 5 to 8. And we will hear God inviting us not only to have hope in the present, but to have a home with him in the future. So first of all, if we look down at the start of that passage, of verse 1, we're going to see the happy ending. The happy ending. Verse 1, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. When I say this is a happy ending, part of the reason we know it's the ending is not just because, it's a few pages to the end of the Bible, but actually because what it describes is the ending, the end point of the whole of history. How does the Bible begin? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's how it all started. The Creator made the creation, and God saw it was good, and he blessed it, and he made humans to be his image bearers in it. The Creator made creation. Now we have come full circle, because the creation is made new. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. We are reminded that the story of the Bible is the story of a world gone wrong, a good world spoilt by sin, human rebellion against God, and cursed with suffering and death and misery. And therefore fixing the world requires a miracle, not just of patching up, but a miracle of new creation, a miracle that happens through Jesus. You could chart the storyline of the Bible in 4 steps, as people tend to do: creation, fall, redemption through Jesus, and then what we have here, the consummation, the flowering of Jesus' work, the final achievement, the end product, a new creation, a happy ending. Remember, in Revelation, we've been tracking through these cartoonish visions which overlap and look through the present age of suffering and to the event the world is heading towards, which is the coming of Jesus' kingdom. And last time we had judgment, we had the final battle, we have Satan defeated, chapter 20. Now we've moved to this deeply symbolic vision of what it will be like when the final victory is won and the world's true king is revealed. It's going to mean new creation. Wouldn't it be brilliant if the world was better? Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever looked out maybe on a balcony over a city and heard the cars and the sirens and smelled the pollution and seen the dirt and the poverty and the suffering and the crime and the injustice? Have you ever looked at that and thought, this world is a mess? Why does it have to be like that? The Bible would say, yes, it is a mess. It's a mess because we are a mess spiritually. We have rejected God. And far from pretending that the world is all sunshine and roses, the Bible says, no, it is a mess, but God is doing something about it. He is bringing a day when he will bring about a new heavens and a new earth, verse 1. This is heavily quoting from Isaiah in the Old Testament, because the Old Testament said this. Isaiah 65, see, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind, but be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create. For I will create Jerusalem to be a delight, and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem. I will take delight in my people. The sound of weeping and of crying will be heard in it no more. That's the Old Testament portrait of the new creation. And that's what John is picking up here. This happy ending. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, verse 1. A million questions arise. Will there be spiders? Will there be ice cream? Will there be a sea? Is that literal where it says there will not be any more sea? There was no longer any sea? No sailing or swimming or fish? Well, probably not. Remember, Revelation is a symbolic vision, and often in Revelation, the sea is associated with sort of evil, like there's a beast that comes from the sea. And the dead were coming out of the sea in chapter 20, a few verses above. And the trade of Babylon happens over the sea. And it's connected in biblical imagery with rebellion against God. So saying there's no longer any sea, it's also parallel, phrased very similarly to, and there will be no more death, verse 4. No more sea, no more death. I think they're connected. It's saying evil will be abolished, symbolically. This is a better world, an unspoilt world, a happy world, the sort of world you dream about. There's an old Elvis song that says, there must be lights burning brighter somewhere. There must be birds flying higher in a sky more blue. If I can dream of a better land where all my brothers walk hand in hand, tell me why can't my dream come true? This says God will make a world like this. A better world, a happy ending. In fact, it's already started, the New Testament would say, because Jesus has risen from the dead, and he's the first fruits of the resurrection, of the new creation. And if we trust in him and we begin a new life in him, the Bible says we are new creations. Now, in the present, we're like the first little taste of the first swallow of summer, the first bud of the harvest. It's already begun, but this is the motherlode. This is the full delivery of the product, the new heavens and the new earth. Is this a different earth, a different planet altogether? Or is this our world renewed? That's a big debate. We don't really have time for that. But basically, my own view is that just as Jesus is described as rising in the Bible and having the nail marks in his hands, so it's the same body he lived and died in, so I would say this is our world, the same world, resurrected, brought to life. And so we're not looking at a quantitatively different creation. We're looking at the same creation made new, reforged, refashioned, with the old dissolved and the new assembled. And it's going to be good. Look at the inhabitants in verse 2 of this creation. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. There's the final Christian hope, not floating around in heaven in a disembodied way, but coming down to the new earth, out of heaven from God. That's the end point. And we're described here, God's people, as two things, a city and a bride, which are both images trying to capture what we're like. A holy city, a city made pure from evil and sin, cleansed of uncleanness, raised from death, and now beautiful, a bride, beautifully dressed, adorned for her husband, because this is the happiest day of her life. This is the wedding day. We can hear, "Here comes the bride," ringing in the background in verse 2, because the bride is walking down the aisle. Weddings are a fairly huge event, aren't they? I've got 2 in my diary this year. And they're the day you tend to look forward to. There's a lot of looking forward to, isn't there? Because you've got to get the invitations out. You've got to book the venue. You've got to get the dress sorted and the bridesmaid's dresses sorted. You've got to do the little placeholders. You've got to book the band. You've got to organise this huge big event. And you look forward to it. You count down the days when it's finally coming. And then when it happens, in the middle of this huge organisational miracle that you somehow pull off, there's this moment, isn't there, where you make promises to your beloved and you start a new life together and you start to get to know each other more intimately than before. Your relationship reaches its fullest point, its consummation. That's what the new creation will be like. A day of joy, a day of fulfillment, a day of consummation, a day of love, of exhilaration, as the one who loves us and laid down his life for us is with us and is drawn into this relationship with us. Because look at the relationship in verse 3. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people. He will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and will be their God." Very simple language, but a very deep truth. The whole Bible has actually been building to this point, because this is the covenant relationship. You will be my people. I will be your God. That's from Exodus in the Old Testament, where it's played out with God and Israel. And now it reaches its fullest form, as God promises, like a husband, to commit himself to his bride, to have and to hold from this day forward, till death us do part. This is the consummation moment, the moment when Christians' relationship with God, which is, well, it now is. He is our husband. He's laid down his life for us. We are in that relationship, but it reaches its fullest expression, doesn't it? Because he is actually with us, not just by faith and by his Spirit, but in person, in the new heavens and the new earth. The God who truly is with us now will be with us even more fully. And his company, he will be with us, verse 3. His company is the best thing of all. He will be with them. Sometimes people are really great, not because of what they give you, because they're just there with you. They can just be there. Their presence is the thing. Perhaps a simple hospital visit for a suffering friend probably won't cure the disease, but it can bring comfort from simply being there. Because when you're there, you're with them, and the problems seem less huge. God's presence here actually does both. He doesn't just comfort us by his presence and his love. He actually fixes the problems as well. Have a look at verse 4, and you will see our greatest problems defeated. Verse 4, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Kleenex are going out of business in the new creation. Portchester Crematorium is going out of business. Doctors are going out of business. Grief counsellors are shutting up shop because there's no business. Samaritans are hanging up the phone because no one is calling anymore. Because the old order of things has passed away. Because through Jesus, God has saved us from our sin, and therefore he can save us from the effects of our sin, the consequences of our sin. The sufferings of the fall are wiped away. Death, where is your sting? This is the happy ending. It's a hopeful passage, isn't it? A new world without suffering and death. God as our lover with us. It's truly a passage for dark times. I'm often struck in the film Titanic when the ship is going down and the deck is starting to slant underfoot and people are panicking and screaming and running around like headless chickens. Everything's going to pot. The icy waters are getting closer. Hope is gone for those who remain. And the director, in one of his shots, puts a small little knot of people, not running around, but clustering around someone. A man standing still in the panic. A man with a Bible in his hands. A man reading 21 verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And in their final minutes on earth, in the shadow of death, he is holding out hope to them. And God is doing the same to us through this passage tonight. He is holding out a happy ending to give you hope. But of course, we come back to the big question. Is hope cruel? Is it empty? In Nietzsche's terms, is it prolonging torments to believe in this kind of stuff? Will this passage just fill your head with dreams that might keep you going a bit and get your spirits up, only to let you down? What reason do you have for thinking it's worth believing in? That's the question that must be answered. And the way Revelation answers it in the next few verses is by some more direct speech in John's vision. As we hear God's generous invitation, this is heading to the generous invitation. Have a look at verse 5. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. That's an amazing statement, isn't it? It sums up what's happening. God is making a new world. He's making everything new. It's a whole new creation. And then he turns to John as a scribe and says, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. Here, God gives us an assurance. He gives us a reason for the hope. He says, I'm telling you, I'm promising you that these words are trustworthy and true. We have a hope that is real, he says, a hope that will not betray or dismay or enslave us or disappoint us, but will stand the test of time. Based on what? Based on what God says. God gives his words that this is trustworthy and true. The foundation for Christian hope is not wishful thinking. It's not guesswork. It's not clever philosophical arguments on the balance of probabilities. It's God coming and giving us a promise. It's him giving us his word. This is the basis for our faith. Someone comes to you and says, I give you my word. Well, is that enough? Because in Revelation, God is asking us to trust him. He's saying these words are trustworthy and true. And you can look at various forms of evidence secondarily. You can look at the historical evidence for Jesus. You can look at rational arguments. You can look at philosophical arguments and all the rest. At the end of the day, they can push you closer or whatever, but they don't get you over the line. What faith is taking God at his word, taking hold of his promises. There comes a point where you need to make a decision that you're going to trust him. It's not blind trust, because you know some things about him, but you don't know everything. And you're going to have to trust him with unknowns, like the future. I wonder if you can do that. I wonder if you feel God is someone you can trust when he says, verse 5, these words are trustworthy and true. Because God is re-articulating here a very generous offer to all who believe. Look at verse 6. He says, it is done. It's like it is finished. But now the consummation has come. It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He tells us who he is. He is the A and the Z. He's the eternal God, the God who was there at the beginning and the God who will be there at the end. We come and go. We rise and fall. God stays the same. And it's not just that he's eternal, it's that he's in control over the beginning and the end. He determines the end and the beginning. It's echoing Isaiah again. I make known the end from the beginning. I say my purpose will stand. And if that's right, it means, well, he'd be a good person to listen to about the future, wouldn't he? He'd be a good person to listen to because he's there in the future, just as he was there at the beginning. And he determines the future. Can you see how who he is there undergirds what he's asking us to believe? It undergirds his promises, his identity. And here's the invitation. To the thirsty, I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Lots of imagery there. Thirsty, water, spring. And look at the generosity of God. I will give without cost. This is grace. This is a freely given gift, undeserved, unprompted, given in generosity. But God in his kindness loves to give gifts, and he loves to give this living water, which represents eternal life. If you and I are thirsty, God is only too pleased to give us this eternal life in his new creation. Jesus talked about this, didn't he? The Old Testament talked about this. God is inviting the thirsty to come and drink and be satisfied. And I wonder if we're thirsty. I wonder if you feel your need of life and hope in a cruel world. I wonder if you feel yourself as needy and parched. I wonder if you look on God as a grumpy Scrooge instead of the generous God that he is, the God who freely gives the water of life. Because verse 7, those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. Here is more generosity. The true inheritance, the true promised land promised to Abraham is this new creation. You will inherit this, and you will be part of his family. All whom believe in Jesus are those whom God adopts, and they will be my children. This is a generous God inviting us into his family. It's a very generous offer. Not only because the water is free, but because what's the alternative? Verse 8. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, all liars, They will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. Stark words there in the image language of Revelation. Talking about sin. Human sin. He mentions a number of sins there. And as he does, I bet you can start to see yourself in them. The cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, may not have murdered, hopefully, but sexually immoral, practice magic arts, all liars. All liars. Have you ever told a lie? You see, part of the reason God's offer is generous because he makes it to us. He makes it to people like us, people who do not deserve to be in his new creation. In our lives and our actions, we've embraced things which fly in the face of the goodness of God, and what we deserve is somewhere very different. Pictured here as a lake of burning sulfur. You don't need me to interpret that image for you. A place of punishment and suffering. That's what we deserve. So we have a dose of in this world, but that, because it's fallen, but this is the full motherload, because humans have sinned. So can you see the enormous generosity of God in extending to us? He looks at people like me, and even though I deserve to be in verse 8, he offers me forgiveness. He offers me the water of life. He offers to take me as his bride. It's quite a thing to give a gift to someone who hasn't deserved it. It's quite a thing to invite someone to join your family. It's almost unimaginably generous. But God, through the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, invites us to join his family, forgiven. He gives us a hope that's almost too good to be true for people who don't deserve it. Come and drink the water, he says. It's such a generous offer. And that's the basis of the hope. How can we have hope in the happy ending? Because of the generous offer. Because we have this invitation. Because God has given us his promise that you can come. Have you ever felt nervous about going to a party or going somewhere where someone might have invited you and you might think, well, okay, they've invited me, but I don't know all the people there, or I don't know them very well, and I'm a bit nervous about that. And when the time comes, perhaps you just haven't seen them in a long time, the nerves start to jangle, and you think, well, maybe I won't go. And when the time comes, you check in your pocket for the invitation, that you've gone to the right place. I'm about to walk into a building I've never been into before. I've got the invitation. Is this the right place? Maybe I should just go home. No, I've got the invitation. I can go. I can come in. And then you come into the room. How are they going to react? How are they going to accept me? Are they going to welcome me? What do we fall back on? We fall back on the invitation in our pocket, which says, "Dear, your name. You are invited to this party, in this place, at this time. BYOB, bring your own booze. Signed, Boris. Signed your friend." And the time comes, and you check the invitation, because that is the basis for you coming to the party. You have the invitation, therefore you can really have confidence walking into that party, knowing you will be accepted. That's what we have here. The happy ending is guaranteed to us by the invitation that God gives. The invitation where he says to the thirsty, "I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life." If you're thirsty and you trust Jesus and drink from that spring, he will give you life. He will forgive you. He will bring you to his new creation. Therefore, you can have hope. Is hope cruel? No. Not if it's real. If it's real, it's great. And here's why we can have hope in the painful present, because you've got the invitation. And so you can come, if you're thirsty, to drink from the water and live with God as his bride in the new creation. Let's thank God for that wonderful invitation.